I understand that is the, please call the Mariner's Song. Is that right? Those of you with a little Navy background, maybe. And Teddy Branham reminded me of that. I read that the other day, but her father died at sea when she was young, and I think he was in the Coast Guard. I'm not sure. I have to find that out again. But that's their sort of anthem. Kind of leads to my question this morning, which is, why do bad things happen? And specifically, why do bad things happen to good people? And I assume most of us are fairly good people. And my best answer is this: I really don't know. I have no idea. But because we're in church, that's sort of my secular answer, which is stuff happens, okay? Stuff happens. That's why things happen. But again, we're in church, so I'm going to try to go a little deeper than that this morning. I'm not the first person to ask the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Some of you may remember a very famous book written in 1983 by Rabbi Harold Kushner, which was titled When Bad Things Happen to Good People. How many of you have read that book? I'm just kind of curious. Yeah, if you haven't read it, read it. And that's an order. You need to read it. It's a great book. And I've got a couple of copies over in my office, if anybody would like to borrow one. So before Rabbi Kushner asked the question, why do bad things happen, so did the biblical character known as Job. In not so many words, he asked, why is this happening to me? And God, or the writer of the book of Job, gives somewhat of an answer. It's a little bit unsatisfactory, but it might be the best answer that we could probably ever have. Basically, God says to Job, well, who the heck are you? Right? Why are you asking me such questions? You know, who are you? Where were you, Job, when I laid the foundations of the earth? Where were you when I created such things as the stars and lightning and clouds and dust and animals and human intelligence? Where were you when I was doing all that? God is giving Job sort of a shut up and take it like a man kind of answer, which is not real comforting when you think about it for someone who had just lost all of his children, his servants, his livestock, and he's suffering physical pain from head to toe. Not the greatest answer, the most satisfying answer in the history of religion and philosophy to say that, you know, where were you? But there it is. Now, we might be stepping out a little too far on a limb this morning by revisiting that question, why do bad things happen to good people? But we are UCC people. We're kind of used to stepping out on the limb on occasion. Sometimes we fall and crash. So here goes. Why do bad things happen to good people? And by the way, I've included an insert this morning, as I mentioned earlier, that you can follow along so you don't get lost. And of course, take notes, I'm sure. Here's number one answer. God blesses the good and curses the bad. And so if bad things happen to someone, they must actually be bad. Now believe it or not, that was a common view in the ancient world. If something bad happened to you, it's because God had cursed you, and the reason God had cursed you is because you were disobeying God. Simple, black and white worldview. Now, we call this Deuteronomist theology, to throw out a big word, because that is the foundational theological foundation of the book of Deuteronomy. And it still is popular in some circles today, even in Christianity, especially those who think that things such as earthquakes and other disasters like that only occur in places where sinners abound. We know sinners abound everywhere, so why aren't there always natural disasters in every place? But fortunately, Jesus debunked this viewpoint. He said, among other things, the rain falls on the just and the unjust alike, or the good and evil alike, meaning that God's blessings and curses, if those things actually exist, are neutral, that God takes more of a neutral stand toward people. Number 2 answer, human free will causes bad things to happen to good people. Now, this is a pretty satisfactory explanation as to why people might do bad things to one another, right? We have free will and we mess up, we do bad things. But that doesn't explain why nature, doesn't have anything to do with people, why nature creates evil and suffering in the world and does bad things to people. Nor does the whole free will thing explain why there are bad people to begin with, right? It just kind of assumes that. So that theory is only partially true. Free will does have something to do with bad things happening, but it doesn't answer every question. Number 3, God is in control. So there must be a reason why bad things happen to good people. How many of you have said that or heard it? God's in control. Sure. But in reality, this is sort of, I don't know. I'm throwing my hands up in the air and confessing, I don't know why bad things happen in the world, but God's in control. It's sort of a, I give up. I don't know. That's okay, an answer for most of our daily existence, but try telling that to, let's say, the parents of a child who just died, that, well, God's in control, therefore there must be a reason why your child died. It's not a great answer. And I would recommend not to say that to people who are suffering in some way. Because if God is in control of everything, then logic suggests, this is where the philosophers come in and kind of drive us a little crazy. Logic suggests that if God's in control, then God must be responsible for all the bad stuff that happens in the world. If you watch the news, there's lots of it. That's an uncomfortable place to be, and so you need to struggle with that notion God is in control. I think we all need to struggle with that. Here's another answer. Let's take God out of the picture for a moment. Even without God, everything happens for a reason. Even bad things that happen to good people. Everything happens for a reason. I ask again, how many of us have said that or we've heard that? Most of us. Everything, and again, on a day-to-day basis, it's okay to say that sort of thing. Everything happens for a reason. Because really, in a sense, this is absolutely true. Everything does happen for a reason. Because of the law of cause and effect, everything that happens because of a reason, of cause and effect. However, we need to distinguish between something happening for a reason and something happening for a purpose. Not everything happens for a purpose. For example, natural disasters. They happen for a lot of reasons that scientists can explain. But I dare say that they don't really have a purpose. Because to have a purpose, there must be a thought behind the action. Somebody must be guiding the natural disaster for it to have a purpose. So unless you believe that God is personally directing natural disasters, then the only purpose to a natural disaster is just to cause disaster or create havoc or suffering in the world. So it's not a very satisfactory answer either. Number 5, because of the fall of humanity, you know what I'm talking about in the book of Genesis, in the Garden of Eden. Because of that, bad things happen to good people because they, or we, are actually bad people. That's an interesting theory, right? We shouldn't be asking why do bad things happen to good people. We should be asking why do bad things happen to bad people, because we're all bad. We're all sinners according to this story, and therefore we deserve bad things to happen to us because our ancestors a long time ago did something really, really, really bad. They ate from the tree of knowledge. It was forbidden fruit. It was the original sin. And after that, as the story goes, everything and everyone went to hell in a handbasket, right? That's what we've inherited. And so now we are vulnerable to every misfortune possible, every disease, death, and all that now because of that. Now, as far as theories go about why bad things happen to good people, this is a very creative story. It's part of our tradition. But I'm not sure that in the 21st century, people should blame every instance of evil and suffering and bad things that happen on the notion that our ancestors ate a piece of forbidden fruit. I think we need to move beyond that. That's a little bit Sunday schoolish, right? We need to move beyond that. Number 6, something else from our religious tradition. The bad God or gods are responsible for why bad things happen to good people. In most religious traditions that I've studied, including our own, the Judeo-Christian tradition, we have this story. We find a story that depicts a cosmological struggle or conflict between good and evil, represented by divine or supernatural beings. And of course, in our religious tradition, Satan is the main culprit, right? Although he seems to have an endless army of demons at his beck and call, able at all times to go out and do all kinds of bad stuff to get people. And again, this is a really interesting story, very creative. But like the story of Adam and Eve, it's a little bit of a cop-out if we use that story all the time to explain why bad stuff is going on all the time. There is a good reason why Flip Wilson used to make fun of this theory by asking or saying, "The devil made me do it." I wish I could do it like Flip did. Most of us are old enough to remember Flip Wilson, right? When he said that. He was making fun of that. And again, in the 21st century, it's not real practical to go around telling our neighbors that the reason bad things are happening because there's a man in a red suit with horns and a tail that's creating all the havoc. It may work with some of your neighbors. It's not going to work with all of them. Number 7, Murphy's Law. Any good Irish people in here? Murphy's Law, that's why bad things happen to good and bad people. Murphy's Law, as you know, states that if something can go wrong, it will. Now, if you've had a bad day, you can always go back to Murphy's Law. Philosophers, however, refer to this as a logical fallacy because Murphy's Law has no basis in fact whatsoever. None whatsoever. It's just not true. Not everything that can happen will happen, right? But it is a fun way to explain why you tripped over your own shoelaces and you fell and broke your hip. You can say it was Murphy's Law. Or we could say, number 8, it was bad luck. So bad luck. That's why bad things happen to good and bad people. Luck. Perhaps if Job had lived in the 21st century, he might have told his friends, I've had a run of bad luck lately with all that happened to him. But unfortunately, luck is not a real thing. It's like Murphy's Law. It's not a real thing. It's something we perceive, and we use that term a lot, but it's not real. It's a superstitious term, to be honest. And superstition is a way to explain things without having to resort to logic, reason, or even reality. Luck. It's not a real thing. But if you feel the need to wear a lucky charm around your neck, feel free to do so, right? Number 9, bad things happen to good people who are accident prone. Well, sure, some people I think may be more prone to having more accidents than other people. Maybe you're unsteady on your feet or you're naturally clumsy. I grew up with a cousin, the bull rider, Buddy Watson, the bull rider. And when he was a kid growing up, anytime he had a glass of milk or water or whatever in his hand, he would drop it at some point. Or if it's sitting on the table, he would knock it over at some point because he was naturally clumsy. Now, how does a clumsy guy get to be a bull rider? I don't know. But he fell off that bull quite a bit too, so maybe not a good profession to be in. But here's the thing. Bad people can be accident prone as much as good people. And I know I shouldn't even be using those categories, bad and good, because we're all a mixture. But accidents can happen to anyone. And a lot of bad things, though, happen to people that are not the result of an accident, right? We can't blame everything on an accident. So that one falls short, too. Finally, number 10. This is my favorite. No matter how much bad things happen to good people, this is as good as it gets. Now, this is actually a theory, a philosophical theory proposed a few hundred years ago by a philosopher named Leibniz. And Leibniz said that among all the possible worlds that God could have created, this is the best one. So God, brings out the books, looks at all the models for possible universes and worlds, and settles on this one, and this is the one we have. So that despite the existence of evil and suffering, this is the best of all possible worlds. And he even said that other possible worlds would have had even greater amounts of evil and suffering and bad things happening to people. Now, of course, there's no way to prove or disprove Leibniz's theory, so we'll leave it at that. But it's one of my favorite theories. Those are the top 10 explanations for why bad things happen to good people. And again, in my mind, none of them are totally satisfactory, although there is some truth in some of them. So really, we're left with just one possible explanation, which is exactly where I started. Bad things happen to good people because stuff happens. Stuff happens. I know I'll clean that up a little bit. You know what I mean. Stuff happens. Here's what I mean by that. Because things happen. Right now, something's happening. Every moment of every day. You might be asleep, but that's a thing that's happening. And inside your body are all kinds of things, your heart beating and all that. Things are always happening. Because things happen, the odds that something bad will happen to you and me at some point in our lives, let me do the math here, it's 100%. 100%. Each of us has a 100% chance of experiencing some degree of evil and suffering in our lives. Let me ask you, is there anyone in here who's never experienced anything bad in their lives? Anybody? And most of you are good people. Most of you. Bad things happen to good people and bad people and the rest of us who are somewhere in between because stuff happens. And you can choose to stay in your house all day long to avoid bad stuff, but then your physical health is going to deteriorate due to lack of sunshine or exercise, and your mental health will also deteriorate if you never leave your house. Stuff happens. And because stuff happens, we are left with only one possible response, not answer, but response to the God who created this universe. And that response is trust. To be a Christian means to trust that the God revealed in Jesus Christ is a God we can trust to love us, embrace us, console us, and most importantly, eternally take care of us. We're never going to know why bad things happen to good people. And so the question we should be asking is this: how do we continue to be good people when bad things happen? Amen.